My son and I were kicked out of my wife's birthday party. My brother-in-law called security while my wife just stood there in silence. Then, quietly, I took out my phone, and with a single call, I took everything from them. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. I was standing at the entrance of the hall with Mario, my 14-year-old son, with a gift in his hands and a smile that faded slowly, very slowly, while two security guards approached us as if we were strangers, as if we were a threat, as if we had no right to be there. And Carmina, my wife, the woman I'd been married to for 19 years, the woman for whom I had organized, paid for, and prepared that party, looked me in the eyes and said nothing. I'll never forget that image. Mario squeezing my hand, the guards asking us to leave, the people watching, and her still with her glass in her hand, as if what was happening was completely normal. We left. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't resist. I took Mario by the shoulder, walked toward the exit, and the moment the hall doors closed behind me, something inside me also closed forever. I sat in the car. Mario was quiet next to me. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. That kid was always stronger than me. I put the gift in the back seat, took out my cell phone, and dialed a number. A single call. And with that call, I took everything from them. But for you to understand why I did what I did, I need to tell you from the beginning. I need you to know who I am, who Carmina is, who Victor is, and what really happened at that party, because what you saw at the door of that hall wasn't the problem. It was just the last drop of something that had been filling up for years. My name is Sebastian. I'm 48 years old, and until very recently, I believed I had a family. I met Carmina when we were both 29. She was beautiful, intelligent, with a smile that could disarm you in seconds. We fell in love quickly. In that way, you fall in love when you're still young and believe that love alone is enough. We got married a year and a half later, and at first everything was exactly what I had dreamed of, but families don't come alone. Carmina came with Victor, her older brother, and Victor, from the first day, made it clear to me that I was never going to be enough for his family. He didn't say it with words. Victor was too smart for that. He did it with gestures, with silences, with comments that seemed innocent but left a hole in your chest. When I spoke at family gatherings, he'd change the subject. When I made a decision, he'd ask Carmina if she was sure. When I achieved something, he'd find a way to make it look small, and Carmina would let him. That's what always hurt me the most. Not Victor, Carmina, because I could have put up with a difficult brother-in-law. What I couldn't stand, what I should have never stood for, was that the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my companion, my wife, never once took my side against him. But I justified it. I told myself he was her brother, that's how they were, that Carmina loved me, and that's what mattered. I lied to myself for years with that story, and in the meantime, I built everything, absolutely everything. The import business we have today, I started it alone with $22,000 that I saved working 12 hours a day for 3 years. Carmina didn't work then. Her family didn't help us either. It was me, only me, and that business grew. It grew until it became something that today moves more than $800,000 a year. I bought the house, I bought the cars, I paid for the trips, the parties, the schools. Everything came from my work, from my hands, from my sleepless nights, and still I was never enough for Carmina's family. Mario came into our lives when I was 34, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That boy taught me what it meant to love unconditionally. From a young age, he was different, sensitive, observant, and Carmina's family never treated him the same as the other children. There was always a distance, a coldness that I didn't fully understand, but that Mario felt, although he never said anything. What I do remember clearly is the first time Victor deliberately ignored him. Mario was 8 years old and had drawn something to show him at a family gathering. Victor looked at it for 2 seconds, said something like "how nice," without even looking at it properly, and went on talking to another adult. Mario put the drawing away in silence. I saw it all, and something in me moved that day. Something that took 6 years to explode. I organized Carmina's birthday party as always. I booked the hall, hired the catering, paid for the decorations, coordinated everything, more than $4,000 in one night to make her happy, because that's who I was, because that's what I did. I always gave. The day of the party, Mario got ready by himself, put on his favorite shirt, wrapped the gift he had bought with his own allowance, and said to me in the car, "Dad, do you think Grandma Lilia will talk to me this time?" It broke my heart. I told him yes. I lied to him. We arrived at the hall. The music was loud, colored lights were spinning. There were at least 80 people inside, people I knew, friends, family, Carmina's colleagues. We walked in, and before we could take 10 steps, I saw Victor crossing the hall with that look of his, that cold, calculating look that I already knew too well. He approached. He didn't greet me. He didn't look at Mario. He said to me in a low but firm voice, "Sebastian, I need you both to leave." I didn't understand. I asked him what he was saying. He told me that tonight wasn't for us, that Carmina had decided it that way, that it was better if we left without making a scene. I looked for Carmina with my eyes. She was less than 10 meters away. She was looking at me and said nothing. Victor raised his hand. 2 security guards approached. Mario squeezed my hand, and at that moment, I made the most important decision of my life. I walked out of that hall with my head held high, with Mario by my side, with the gift in my hand and my heart in pieces. But on the outside, I showed nothing. That was the hardest part, keeping a calm face while inside. I felt that something was collapsing, that the ground beneath me was no longer the same, that the life I thought I had was silently falling apart, brick by brick. We got to the car. Mario got in without saying a word, put the gift on his lap, and looked out the window. I sat in the driver's seat and stayed still for a moment, just a moment, because I couldn't let myself break down in front of him. That kid had already seen too much that night. I started the engine, and before pulling away, I took out my cell phone. I dialed Rodrigo's number, my lawyer, my friend of more than 12 years. The man who knew every detail of my business, my properties, of everything I had built with my own hands. He answered on the second ring. I said 3 words. "Rodrigo, activate everything." He knew exactly what that meant. 3 months ago, in a conversation I had had with him for reasons I couldn't fully explain to myself at the time, we had talked about the possibility of protecting my assets in case of separation. I didn't want to believe I would need it. But something in me, some instinct you develop after years of ignoring signs, had told me it was better to be prepared. That night, that instinct saved me. Rodrigo didn't ask questions. He just said, "Understood. You'll have everything ready first thing in the morning." And we hung up. I started the car. Mario was still looking out the window. Halfway there, he said to me in a very low voice, without turning to look at me, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" And that question so small and so huge at the same time, was what finally broke me inside. Because that 14-year-old boy, that boy who had gotten ready by himself, who had bought a gift with his own money, who had asked if his grandmother would talk to him, that boy was thinking that it was his fault. I told him no. I told him he had done nothing wrong. I told him that sometimes adults make very big mistakes, and that what happened that night had nothing to do with him. I tried to make my voice sound firm, so it wouldn't tremble. And I think I succeeded because Mario nodded, rested his head against the window, and fell asleep before we got home. I carried him to his room, put him to bed, took off his shoes, covered him, and stood at his bedroom door watching him sleep, thinking about everything that boy had carried without saying a word, about all the times Carmina's family had made him feel invisible, about all the times I had closed my eyes hoping things would get better on their own. Things don't get better on their own. I learned that night. I went to the living room. I poured myself a glass of water because I didn't want alcohol. I wanted to have a completely clear mind. I sat on the armchair I had bought myself when we inaugurated that house 11 years ago, and I started to review everything, not with anger, with coldness, with that strange clarity that comes when you've hit rock bottom and know you have nothing left to lose. I thought about how it all started. Carmina and I met at a work meeting. She was working then as an administrative assistant at a logistics company. I already had my small import business, just starting, with debts and dreams, but with a determination that few had. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and something clicked immediately. She was direct, funny, with an energy that filled the room. I fell in love fast, too fast. Well, I didn't see at that moment, because love clouds exactly what you need to see was the dynamic that existed between Carmina and her family, especially between Carmina and Victor. Victor was the oldest of 3 siblings. Carmina was the middle one, and Victor had always acted as the patriarch of that family, the one who made the decisions, the one who gave the opinions, the one who kept order. And Carmina, although she was an intelligent and strong woman in many aspects, with Victor she became a different person. She shrank, she gave in, she sought his approval in everything. I saw it from the beginning, but I told myself it was a family thing, that everyone has their dynamics, that with time I would find my place. I never found it. The first Christmas we spent together as a couple, Victor organized dinner and didn't ask me anything. Not what I wanted to eat, not what time I was arriving, not if I had any family traditions. He treated me like a second-class guest at a gathering that was supposed to be mine too. I mentioned it to Carmina afterwards. She told me that's how Victor was, not to take it personally, that deep down he was a good person. That phrase, deep down he's a good person. I heard it for 19 years. I heard it until it stopped meaning anything. When Mario was born, I thought everything would change, that a child would unite the family in a different way. And at first it seemed so. Carmina was happy. I was happy. And for a while, Victor kept his attitudes to himself. But when Mario started to grow, when he started to have his own character, his sensitivity, his different way of seeing the world, the coldness returned. And this time it wasn't just from Victor, it was also from Lilia, Carmina's mother. It was also from the cousins, the uncles, from that whole family that never quite accepted that child in the same way they accepted the others. I never fully understood why. I told myself it was because Mario was different, that not all children connect the same way, that big families are complicated. I convinced myself of many things so I wouldn't have to see the truth. And the truth was that in that family, Mario and I were always the outsiders, but I kept building, I kept working, I kept putting in money, time, energy. The business grew more than I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. By 40, I already had a company with a turnover of over $500,000 a year. I bought a second property, opened an investment account, gave Carmina a corporate car with access to $30,000 a month for house and personal expenses. I never asked her what she spent it on. I trusted her completely. That was my biggest mistake, because while I was building, something was moving behind the scenes, something I didn't see, something I should have seen much sooner. That night, sitting in my living room in silence with Mario, sleeping in his room, and my cell phone turned off on the coffee table, I started to remember little things, conversations Carmina had had in a low voice with Victor that she'd cut short when I entered the room. Documents she had asked me to sign for business procedures that I signed without reading because I trusted her. Meetings she attended with Victor to discuss family matters that she never gave me details about. Just snippets, just small, loose pieces that at the time had meant nothing. But that night, after they kicked me out of the party like a stranger, after seeing the look on Carmina's face as she watched me without saying a single word, those pieces started to fit together, and what they were forming chilled me to the bone. I got up from the armchair, went to my home office, opened the drawer where I kept copies of the most important documents. I started to check invoice by invoice, contract by contract, and as I was checking, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Carmina. It said, "Sebastian, we need to talk. Don't do anything you can't take back." I read it twice, left it on the desk, and continued reviewing the documents because it was already too late to talk. I didn't sleep a minute that night. I stayed in my office until 4 a.m. reviewing every paper, every contract, every document in that drawer. And the more I reviewed, the more I realized that what I was seeing wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a careful, calculated pattern built with patience over months, maybe years, by people I had loved and trusted completely. Let me explain what I found, because you need to understand it to comprehend what I did next. When I started my business, everything was registered solely in my name. I was the owner, the director, the sole legal responsible for everything. But 4 years ago, Carmina proposed something that seemed completely reasonable to me at the time. She told me that for tax purposes, to better protect us as a family in case of any legal or financial problem, it would be convenient for her to be listed as a co-owner of a part of the business. She presented the idea with numbers, with arguments, with the help of an accountant I didn't know, but who she said was very reliable. I analyzed it. I asked Rodrigo, Rodrigo told me that in principle there were no problems as long as the terms were well defined. The terms were not well defined because what I signed, what I thought was a minor and symbolic participation of Carmina in the business, actually granted her rights to 42% of the company's shares. 42%. And there was a clause buried in the legal language of the middle pages that established that in case of dissolution of the marriage or conflict between partners, either of the two parties had the right to request an audit and an independent valuation of the assets with the possibility of demanding a partial liquidation. I read that clause 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and then I understood why Victor had kicked me out of that party. It wasn't a whim. It wasn't a pointless humiliation. It was a maneuver. Because if I reacted badly that night, if I made a scene, if I threatened or verbally assaulted someone, they would have a documented episode of emotional instability on my part. And that in a legal process can be used, it can be used to question my ability to run the business, to argue that they need to protect their interests, to justify a forced liquidation. They wanted to provoke me, and I didn't fall for it. I got up from the chair, walked around the office in silence, breathed, and instead of exploding, of calling Carmina, of going to look for Victor, I did the exact opposite. I sat down again, picked up my cell phone, and started making moves. First, I called Rodrigo. It was 4:20 in the morning, but Rodrigo answered. That man always answered when I needed him. I explained what I had found in the documents. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, Sebastian, I need you not to touch anything until we meet tomorrow at 8. Don't sign anything. Don't transfer anything. Don't talk to Carmina about the business. I asked him if there was anything I could do that same night. He said yes. He told me to check if there were any recent movements in the joint account. I opened the bank's app. My heart stopped. In the last 45 days, $3,000 had come out of the joint account in small transfers distributed on different dates, some of $3,000, some of $5,000, one of $12,000. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, an account that wasn't in the name of any business supplier of any service I knew. $3,000. I sent a screenshot to Rodrigo via message. His response was immediate. Don't do anything yet. Tomorrow at 8. I closed the app, put the phone face down on the desk, and stared at the ceiling for good while feeling how everything I'd built, everything I thought was solid and real, was revealing itself as something completely different, like a structure that looked firm on the outside, but was being slowly emptied from the inside without me realizing it. I thought about Mario, about how he had fallen asleep in the car with the gift on his lap, about how he had asked me if he had done something wrong, about how that boy, since he was 8 years old, had carried the weight of knowing he was different in that family, without understanding why. And at that moment, with all the anger and pain I was feeling, something settled within me, something that became completely clear. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not for me, for Mario. I took a notebook and started writing down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, documents I had signed, moments when Carmina had spoken to Victor alone, expenses I hadn't questioned, decisions I had let pass because I trusted, because I loved, because I was a fool who preferred to believe in people rather than see reality. I wrote for 2 hours. I filled 8 pages. At 6 in the morning, I heard Mario get up. I left the office, locked the door, and went to the kitchen to make him breakfast like any other day, as if the night before hadn't happened, as if my life wasn't taking a 180-degree turn in silence. Mario came into the kitchen with his hair messy and his eyes still half closed. He sat in his usual place, looked at me, and said, "Did you sleep, Dad?" I told him yes. I lied to him for the second time in less than 12 hours. We had breakfast together almost without speaking, and when he finished and got up to go get ready, he stopped for a moment behind me, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Everything's going to be okay, Dad." I don't know how he knew. I don't know what it is that children perceive that we parents are unable to hide no matter how hard we try. But that boy knew, and those 5 words gave me more strength than anything else. That morning at 7:45, I left for Rodrigo's office. On the way, the phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from Carmina. 5, 7, 10 messages. I didn't read them. Then calls. 2, 3. I didn't answer. Then a message from Victor, the first he'd sent me in months, which said bluntly, Sebastian, act intelligently. This can be resolved in a civilized manner. I read it once, closed it, and sped up. Rodrigo was waiting for me with coffee and a grim face. He had me sit down, put the documents I had sent him by photo during the night on the table, and for the next hour he explained to me with all the clarity in the world what he was seeing. The plan, because it was a plan, was to use Carmina's stake in the business as leverage to force a negotiation. If I didn't accept their terms in a separation, they could activate the contract clause, request an audit, and paralyze the business operations for months. That would cost me clients, contracts, reputation. It would cost me everything. Rodrigo looked me straight in the eye and said, "When did you sign this, Sebastian?" I told him the date. He said, "Did you read the whole contract before signing?" I lowered my head. No, I hadn't read it all. I had trusted. Rodrigo closed the folder and told me something I'll never forget. "The mistake is already made. Now, what matters is how we fix it." He asked me if I was willing to do whatever it took to protect what was mine. I said yes. He asked if I understood that this could mean the end of the marriage for good. I told him the marriage had already ended the night before when Carmina looked me in the eyes from inside the hall and said not a single word. Rodrigo nodded, opened his computer, and we started to work. The first thing we did was freeze the joint account. Not empty it, freeze it, which is different and which within the legal process was completely justified given the movement of funds I had detected. The second was to cancel the corporate card Carmina used. The third was to initiate an internal review of the business to document all operations of the last 2 years and establish clearly what belonged to whom. Everything done within the legal framework, all documented, all clean. I left Rodrigo's office at 10 in the morning feeling different, not relieved, not calm, different, like someone who finally stopped running from something and decided to face it. My phone vibrated once more. This time it wasn't Carmina or Victor. It was a number I hadn't saved, an unknown number. The message said, "Sebastian, it's Georgina. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please, don't tell anyone I wrote to you." I stopped on the sidewalk. I read the message twice. Georgina was Carmina's best friend. I had known her since before Carmina and I got married. She had always been part of the inner circle. She had always been present at meetings, at birthdays, at important moments, and now she was writing to me in secret, asking me not to say anything. I put the phone in my pocket, kept walking towards my car, and for the first time since all this had started, I felt that the story was much bigger than I thought. I put the phone in my pocket and stood next to my car for a moment. The morning sun was strong, and the street was full of people moving, living, knowing nothing about what was happening in my life. That's the world. It keeps spinning even if yours is stopping. I took out my phone again. I read Georgina's message again. "Sebastian, it's Georgina. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please, don't tell anyone I wrote to you." I read it slowly. I analyzed every word. Georgina wasn't an impulsive woman. I knew her well enough to know that. If she was writing to me in secret, if she was asking for discretion, it was because she had a very powerful reason to do so. I replied with 3 words. "Tell me when and where." Her response came in less than a minute. She gave me an address, a small cafe that was 20 minutes from where I was. She said she could be there in an hour. I told her I'd be there. I started the car, and as I was driving, the phone started ringing again. It was Carmina, the 11th call of the day. I let it ring to the end, go to voicemail because I had nothing to say to Carmina until I knew exactly everything that was going on. Talking too soon, talking with anger. Talking without complete information was exactly what they wanted me to do, and I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes before Georgina. I sat at a table in the back with my back to the wall, facing the entrance. I ordered coffee and waited. Georgina arrived on time. She came in looking from side to side, like someone who doesn't want to be seen. She located me, walked towards me, and sat in front of me without greeting me with a hug, as she always did. Her face was tense, her eyes tired, like someone who hadn't slept well or who had been carrying something heavy for days. She looked at me for a moment in silence, and then said, "Sebastian, what I'm about to tell you could cost me my friendship with Carmina." I need you to understand that before I begin. I told her I understood, that I was listening. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She told me that 2 months ago Carmina had called her for advice, that in that conversation Carmina had told her she was thinking of separating from me. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was what Georgina told me next. She said that in that same conversation Carmina had mentioned that Victor was helping her prepare everything, that Victor had a lawyer, that this lawyer had reviewed the business contracts and had found a way to use Carmina's stake to force a favorable negotiation. So far, it was what I already suspected, but then Georgina lowered her voice, leaned forward a bit, and told me something I didn't expect. She told me that the birthday party wasn't just a party. She told me that that night in that hall in front of all the family and friends, Carmina and Victor had planned to announce something, that this announcement was part of the legal strategy they'd prepared, that they needed witnesses, people present, people who could later testify that they had acted in good faith, that they had tried to resolve things openly and transparently, and that I had been the problem. That's why they had invited me to the party. That's why Victor had taken me out in front of everyone. They needed me to react badly. They needed the scandal. They needed me to scream, to threaten, to lose control in front of 80 people who could later say that Sebastian was unstable, that Sebastian was aggressive, that Sebastian was a danger to the business and the family. That's what they had planned. I sat still listening to all this. The coffee cup in front of me was untouched. I felt my pulse racing, but my mind was completely cold, a coldness that surprised me, as if a part of me had already suspected it and was now just confirming what I already knew. I asked Georgina why she was telling me all this. She looked at me for a moment before answering and said, "Because they have Mario involved in this." She paused. "There's something Carmina has never told you, something that Victor knows and is using as pressure on her. And I think you have a right to know. But for that, Sebastian, I need you to give me time to tell you properly. There's a part of this story I still don't fully understand, and I need to confirm it before I talk to you." Mario, she had said Mario's name. I felt the air in the cafe get heavier, the voices around me fade away. That the only real thing at that moment was Georgina's face in front of me and my son's name floating between us like a warning. I told her to tell me what she knew, that whatever it was, I could handle it. She said she needed one more day, that there was something she had to verify, that she would write to me again by the next day at the latest. I didn't like waiting, but I understood that pushing her wouldn't work. Georgina was scared. She was taking a huge risk by talking to me, and I needed to respect that if I wanted her to keep talking. I told her it was okay, that I'd wait for her message, that I trusted her. We said goodbye. She left first. I stayed at the table for another 5 minutes, finished the cold coffee in one gulp, and then left two in the car with my hands on the steering wheel. Not starting it yet. I processed everything Georgina had told me. The party is a trap, the planned announcement, the witnesses, the calculated provocation, and then that last thing, the thing she hadn't finished telling me. Something about Mario, something Carmina had never told me. Something Victor used as leverage. What could it be? What could Victor know about my son that I didn't? I started the car. I started driving aimlessly for a few minutes, just letting my mind work. And it was at that moment, while I was driving down an avenue I knew by heart, that the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Carmina, it was Victor. I hesitated for 2 seconds and answered. I didn't let him speak. Before he could say a single word, I said with a calmness I didn't understand where it was coming from, "Victor, don't call me again today. Whatever you have to say to me, say it to my lawyer. His name is Rodrigo, and he already has my instructions. Have a good day." And I hung up. 3 seconds later, Victor called again. I didn't answer. He called one more time. I didn't answer. Then he sent me a message that said, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. You still have time to be reasonable." I read it, ignored it, and called Rodrigo to tell him what Georgina had told me. Rodrigo listened to everything in silence. When I finished, he told me that what Georgina described made a lot of sense with what he had already analyzed from a legal point of view. That the strategy of creating witnesses of an alleged aggressive behavior on my part was a known tactic in separation processes with asset disputes. That the fact that I hadn't reacted the night before was at this moment my best card. He told me something else. He told me that I needed to get, in whatever way I could, some concrete proof of the conversations or plans Carmina and Victor had had, something more solid than Georgina's testimony, which, although valuable, wasn't enough on its own. I asked him how. He told me to think that I knew these people better than anyone, that if there was a plan, there were traces, there are always traces. I got home, parked, stayed in the car for a moment longer, thought about the documents I had reviewed the night before. I thought about the bank transfers. I thought about the conversations Carmina cut short when I entered the room. I thought about the unknown accountant she had introduced me to 4 years ago. I thought about every detail I had ignored because I prefer to trust. And then I remembered something I had completely forgotten until that moment. 6 months ago, Carmina had asked me for access to the business email to send some documents to a client. According to her, I had given her my password without a second thought. She used it that day and never asked for it again. But if she had logged into the email, there was a record, a history, a digital footprint that doesn't disappear. I went into the house. I went straight to my office, opened the computer, and started searching. What I found left me speechless. The business email history doesn't lie. Computers don't lie. The dates, the times, the access logs, everything is recorded somewhere, even if you think you've deleted it. And what I found that afternoon, sitting in front of my computer in my own home office, was enough to make the last piece of doubt I had disappear forever. Carmina had logged into the business email 17 times in the last 6 months. Not once, not twice. 17. At times when I was out of the house, in meetings, traveling, always when she knew for sure that I wasn't there and she hadn't logged in to send documents to clients, as she had told me. She had logged in to forward emails, internal business emails, contracts with suppliers, financial statements, revenue projections, information that had no reason to be in the hands of anyone outside the company. She had forwarded them all to the same address, an email address I didn't recognize at first, but when I put that name in the search engine, it took me directly to a law firm, a firm specializing in corporate disputes and high net worth divorces, a firm that, according to its website, had as one of its main partners a lawyer I didn't know, but whose last name did sound familiar. It was the same last name as the accountant Carmina had introduced me to 4 years ago, the one who had recommended the corporate restructuring, the one who had drafted the contract that gave Carmina 42% of the business. It wasn't a coincidence. None of this was a coincidence. I took screenshots of everything, of the access history, of the forwarded emails, of the dates, of the destination address. I saved everything in a folder on an external drive that I disconnected from the computer and put in my jacket pocket. Then I sent everything to Rodrigo through a secure channel he had told me about weeks ago for this type of situation, because Rodrigo was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, and that was exactly why I had him by my side. Rodrigo replied in minutes. He told me that what I was sending him was exactly what we needed. What's that? Combined with the record of the bank transfers, it built a solid case. He told me that by the next day, he would have everything ready to file a precautionary measure that would protect the business assets while the legal process unfolded. He told me we were in a good position to stay calm. Calm. What a difficult word. At that moment, I closed the computer, leaned back in the office chair, and stared at the ceiling for a good while. I thought about Carmina. I thought about the first time I saw her, about how she laughed, about how her hair smelled when we hugged, about all the years we had built together, or that I thought we had built together, because now I wondered how much of all that had been real, how much had been genuine, and how much had been part of something I hadn't been able to see. And the strangest thing was that I didn't cry. I wanted to cry. I try to feel that release they say comes when you finally accept something, but it didn't come. There was just a kind of cold emptiness where there used to be love. Like when they turn off the light in a room suddenly, and you're left standing in the dark, not knowing exactly where the furniture is. I got up, went to the kitchen. Mario had arrived from school and was sitting at the counter with headphones on, doing homework. He saw me come in and took off one headphone. He asked me how I was. I told him fine. I asked if he had eaten. He said yes, that he had heated up what was in the fridge. I told him we were ordering pizza that night, whatever he wanted. His face lit up. Those small moments. Those simple moments that in another context would have passed without me noticing. That night, I treasured them as if they were the most valuable thing I had. Because they were. At 7 p.m., I heard the key in the front door. It was Carmina. She came in with her purse on her arm and the keys in her hand. She looked at me from the kitchen entrance. I was sitting in the living room. I didn't say anything. I waited. Mario was in his room with the door closed. Carmina left her purse on the dining room table, crossed her arms, and said, "Sebastian, we need to talk." I told her, "Yes, let's talk." She sat in front of me, and the first thing she did wasn't apologize. It wasn't explain. The first thing she did was tell me that I had acted disproportionately by freezing the account and canceling the card, that what I had done was economic aggression, that her lawyer was already aware. I listened to her without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her with all the calm in the world if there was anything else she wanted to tell me. She looked at me for a moment, confused by my tone. She expected me to be furious. She expected the yelling, the accusations, the loss of control. She didn't expect this. She didn't expect a man sitting calmly in his own living room, listening to her without getting upset. I asked her directly, "Carmina, why did you send financial information from the business to Victor's law firm?" The color drained from her face. She froze completely. Her eyes shifted for a second. That involuntary second that gives people away before they have time to construct an answer, and then she tried to recover. She told me she didn't know what I was talking about, that she had never done that I was being paranoid, that the business problems had affected me more than I thought. I told her I had the dates, the times, the access logs, the forwarded emails, all documented. Silence, a long, heavy silence that filled the entire room and crept into every corner of that house that I had bought with my work. Carmina lowered her eyes, raised them, looked at me, and for the first time in this whole conversation, I saw something different in her face. Not regret, not yet, but something like fear. The fear of someone who has just understood that the plan they thought was perfect had a hole. That hole was bigger than they had calculated. I said, "You don't have to say anything tonight, but I want you to know that I know everything, and what I don't know yet, I will know very soon." I got up, went to the kitchen, took out the menu from Mario's favorite pizzeria, and called him a choose. Carmina remained seated in the living room without moving for several minutes. I could see her from the kitchen, still processing, calculating. At 8, my phone rang. It was a message from Georgina. It said, "Tomorrow at 9 in the same place. I have everything you need to know now. Sebastian, prepare yourself. What I'm going to tell you changes everything." I read it, took a breath, and replied that I'd be there. That night, I had pizza with Mario. We talked about his school, about a movie he wanted to see, about a video game that had been recommended to him. We talked about everything that had nothing to do with what was happening, and it was the best conversation I'd had in a long time. Carmina didn't leave her room all night, and I, for the first time in days, slept for a few hours, but I slept because I knew that the next day everything was going to change. What Georgina had to tell me, what she had called something that changes everything, was the missing piece, the piece that was going to explain why Mario had always been treated differently, why Victor had power over Carmina, because this whole story was darker and deeper than I had imagined. And when you've already hit rock bottom, when you've lost your fear, when you have nothing left to lose except the truth, hearing it isn't terrifying. It's liberating. I arrived at the cafe at 8:45, 15 minutes before the agreed time, because I couldn't stay at home a minute longer. I had spent the night sleeping in snatches, waking up with my mind racing, with unanswered questions still spinning endlessly. What did Georgina know about Mario? What was his secret that Carmina had never told me? What did Victor have in his hands that gave him so much power over his own sister? I ordered a coffee. I sat at the same table as the day before and waited. Georgina arrived on time. This time she came in faster, without looking around so much, like someone who had already made a decision and decided not to back down. She sat in front of me, put her phone on the table with the screen facing down, looked me straight in the eyes, and without preambles, without beating around the bush, she said, "Sebastian, what I'm about to tell you, I found out 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been carrying this alone without knowing what to do, and I can't anymore." I told her to speak, that I was listening. She took a breath and began. She told me that 3 weeks ago, she had had dinner with Carmina. A friend's dinner, one of those they had from time to time, with no specific plans, just to see each other and talk. That night Carmina had had more wine than usual, that she was nervous, tense, and that at some point during the night, when the conversation got intimate and her guard was down, Carmina had told her something Georgina didn't expect to hear. She had told her that Mario wasn't my biological son. I remained completely still. Georgina continued. She told me that Carmina had explained that before marrying me, she had had a short but intense relationship with another man. A man who wasn't part of her current life, who had disappeared before she knew she was pregnant, that when she discovered the pregnancy, she was already with me, that she made the decision not to tell me anything, that she convinced herself that what mattered was the family we were going to build together, that over time she came to believe, or maybe pretend to believe, that it didn't matter anymore. But Victor knew. Victor had known from the beginning. Carmina had told him before marrying me, seeking advice, seeking support. And Victor, instead of helping her make an honest decision, had convinced her to keep quiet. He had told her that if she told me, I would leave her, that it was better to build the family and not destroy it before it began. That this secret could stay buried forever. And for 14 years, that secret had been the invisible thread with which Victor controlled his sister. Every time Carmina wanted to defend herself from him, every time she wanted to set a boundary, every time she considered talking to me about something that didn't suit Victor, Victor would remind her of what he knew, not with explicit threats, with insinuations, with looks, with that silent power that someone who holds the biggest secret of your life has. Carmina was a prisoner of her own silence, and Victor was the jailer. I listened to it all, without moving a muscle. Georgina spoke for several minutes straight, with a tense but firm voice, looking at me almost without blinking, as if she needed to make sure I was understanding every word. When she finished, she fell silent, watched me, waited for my reaction, and I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't get up, I didn't hit the table, I didn't break down in tears. I stayed seated, still, with my hands around the coffee cup that was already cold. And after a moment that seemed very long, I asked her just one thing. I asked her if Carmina had told her who Mario's biological father was. Georgina shook her head. She said that Carmina hadn't given her that name, that maybe she herself hadn't had contact with that person for years, that what she did tell her was that this man knew nothing, that he had never known anything about the pregnancy. I nodded slowly, and then something happened that I hadn't planned, something that just came from within, from that place where you keep things you can't even tell yourself. My eyes filled with tears, not of anger, not of betrayal, of something else, of something that took me a few seconds to identify. It was love for Mario. Because the second Georgina told me that Mario wasn't my biological son, the first thing I felt, the first reaction I had before any other was to think of him, of his face, of his hand squeezing mine at the door of that hall, of how he called me Dad with absolute naturalness, as if that word were the most solid thing in the world, of how he had put his hand on my shoulder that morning and told me that everything would be okay. That boy was my son. Nothing else mattered. Biology doesn't build the years. It doesn't build the nights of fever and the days of homework and the soccer games and the conversations in the car and the shared silences and the Saturday breakfasts. Love builds that. And that love was mine. It was ours and nobody could take it from me. I told Georgina, Mario is my son. That doesn't change. She nodded. I saw her eyes get misty too. She told me she knew I was going to say that. That's why she had decided to talk, because she knew I was the man that boy needed, and that what was happening, what Victor and Carmina were doing, wasn't fair to either of us. I asked her if there was anything else, if there was any other detail I needed to know before taking the next step. She hesitated for a moment. Then she said yes. She told me that Carmina in that same dinner had mentioned something else, something Georgina had tried to get out of her head but couldn't ignore. She told me that Carmina had told her that if the legal process moved forward and I refused to negotiate, Victor was willing to use the information about Mario as an argument, to reveal it publicly, to use it to emotionally destabilize me, during the process, so that I would make hasty decisions, so that I would make mistakes. It chilled me to the bone, not because the revelation itself hurt me. I had already processed it. I had already accepted it in the bottom of my heart with a clarity that I myself didn't fully understand. But it was there. What Shomi was thinking about Mario. That this child who was not at fault for anything could have been dragged into the middle of all this. That someone could use him as a weapon. That Victor, that cold and calculating man, was willing to hurt a 14-year-old boy to win a money dispute. That's when the calm I had maintained for 2 days began to tremble. I kept the trembling. I kept it inside, when no one could see it. I put the coffee cup on the table carefully. I looked at Georgina and said with a voice I didn't recognize myself, "Thank you for telling me all this. What you just did took a lot of courage." She nodded. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her what I had to do. I told her I was going to protect my son, that I was going to protect what was mine, and that this time I wasn't going to make the mistake of underestimating the people in front of me. We said goodbye. I left the cafe. The morning sun was stronger than the day before. I walked to my car. I sat down, dialed Rodrigo's number. When he answered, I said, "Rodrigo, I need us to add something to the case. There's a situation with Mario that needs immediate legal protection. I'll explain everything in person. Can you see me in an hour?" He said yes. I started the car, and as I was driving, something changed in me definitively. Until that moment, I had been acting with coldness, with strategy, with control. But there was a part of me that still hoped that some of this had a different explanation, that maybe Carmina wasn't as involved as it seemed, that maybe she had been manipulated, that maybe at some point we would be able to really talk. That thought died in the cafe. Because it's one thing to be deceived out of fear and another thing to use your child as a weapon. That has no forgiveness, that has no negotiation, that has no turning back. And Victor was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Rodrigo was waiting for me in his office with the door closed and 2 cups of coffee on the desk. When I entered and he saw my face, he knew something had changed, that what I brought that morning was different from the previous days. It wasn't anger, it wasn't desperation, it was something more dangerous than all that. It was certainty. I sat down and told him everything Georgina had told me. Everything, without omitting any detail. About Mario, about the biological father, about Victor using that secret as control over Carmina for years. And most importantly, what had chilled me to the bone in the cafe, the possibility that Victor was willing to use that information publicly during the legal process to destabilize me. Rodrigo listened to everything without interrupting me. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, clasped his hands on the desk, and told me something I needed to hear. "Sebastian, legally, biological paternity is not what determines your rights as a father. In this case, you have exercised the paternity of Mario for 14 years. That carries enormous legal weight. If they try to use that as an argument, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot." I breathed. He told me that what we did need to do urgently was to document and protect the legal relationship between Mario and me, that there were mechanisms for that, that if the process moved toward a formal separation, I could request custody based on everything I had been as a father for all those years, regardless of biology, and that if Victor tried to reveal that information publicly, it could backfire on them, because a judge doesn't look favorably on someone using a minor as a pressure tool in a dispute between adults. I felt the ground firm beneath my feet again, but Rodrigo wasn't finished. He told me he had spent the night reviewing everything I'd sent him, the forwarded emails, the bank transfers, the contracts, and had found something else, something I hadn't seen because I didn't know where to look. He told me that the $3,000 transfers that had come out of the joint account hadn't gone to just any account. They had gone to an account registered in the name of a company, a small company established just 8 months ago, in which 2 people were listed as partners. One of them was a name I didn't know. The other was Victor. Victor had been receiving money from my joint account for months. My money, the money I had earned working, that I had deposited in that account as part of the life I built with Carmina. It had been going straight into Victor's pocket through a shell company that no one had ever mentioned to me. I closed my eyes for a second, opened them, asked Rodrigo if that was enough for a complaint. He said yes, that this wasn't just an argument in a divorce proceeding, that this was fraud, that depending on how it was documented and presented, it could lead to a criminal investigation that went far beyond a marital dispute. I asked what he needed from me. He told me he needed me to go to the bank that same day and file a formal report of the movement of funds, that this would start a chain of official documentation that we could later use. He told me he also needed me to think if there was any witness, someone from the business, an employee, a supplier who had noticed anything irregular in recent months. And then I remembered something. I remembered Elsa. Elsa had been working with me for 7 years as an administrative assistant for the business. She was discreet, efficient, loyal, in a way that few employees are. 3 months ago, in a casual conversation while we were reviewing invoices, she had told me something that at the time I hadn't given any importance to. She had told me that she had received a call from someone who introduced himself as an external accountant, asking for the financial statements of the last quarter, that she had told him that only I handled that information directly, and that the call had seemed strange to her. She had mentioned it in passing, and I had told her it was probably a mistake, not to worry. It wasn't a mistake. It was part of the information gathering process that Carmina and Victor had been doing long before I thought. I told Rodrigo I had a witness, that I was going to talk to her that same day. He told me that it was perfect, that when I had her statement, he would contact me, that things were moving fast, and that we needed to keep up that pace. I left Rodrigo's office at 11 in the morning and went straight to the business. When I entered, Elsa looked at me with an expression that mixed relief and concern at the same time. She told me that Carmina had called that morning asking for certain documents, that she hadn't given her anything because she didn't have my direct authorization to do so, but that the call had made her nervous. I told her she had done the right thing. I told her I needed to talk to her in private. We closed the door to my office, and I explained in general terms what was happening. I told her about the call from the external accountant she had mentioned. I asked her if she remembered the date, if she remembered the number, if there was any other detail that might be relevant. Elsa went to her computer and in less than 5 minutes found a record of the call in the internal system we used to document external contacts, date, time, origin number, and the name the person had given. Mario Fuentes, independent accountant. Mario Fuentes. I searched for that name in the business search engine, and it appeared linked to the same law firm to which Carmina had forwarded the business emails. The circle was closing. Elsa asked me if I was okay. I told her I was. I told her that what she had given me was very important, and that in the coming days a lawyer would contact her to take her formal statement. She told me she would cooperate in any way necessary, that the business was my life, and she knew that better than anyone. I thanked her. I left the office, and at that moment, standing in the hallway of my own business, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. I felt that the pieces were complete, that there was nothing more to look for, because everything was there. The financial fraud, the leaked emails, Victor's company, the witness, the documents, everything. I took out my phone and made a decision I had been postponing since the first day. I sent a message to Carmina, short, direct, without emotion. I told her we needed to talk at home that night, that she should come alone, without Victor, without lawyers, just her and me, that there were things we had to say face to face before everything passed into the hands of other people forever. She replied in minutes. She said yes, that she would be home at 7. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the business working normally. I reviewed contracts, took calls, answered emails. Because the life of the business couldn't stop, because there were employees who depended on that work, because everything I had built deserved to keep standing regardless of what was happening in my personal life. At 6:30, I got home. Mario was in the living room watching television. I told him I was going to talk to his mom that night, that it was a conversation for adults, that if he felt uncomfortable, he could go to a friend's house. He said no, that he preferred to be in his room, that if I needed him, he would be there. 14 years old. And that kid had more maturity than most of the adults I knew. At 7 sharp, the door opened. Carmina entered, looked at me, and I looked at her. And in that 3-second silence, before either of us said a single word, I think we both knew that what was about to happen in that room would change everything forever. I sat down, gestured for her to sit, and before she could take control of the conversation, before she could start with prepared arguments or the version her lawyer had instructed her to use, I placed 3 things on the coffee table: the screenshots of the forwarded emails, the bank record of the transfers to Victor's company, and the name of the law firm with the date of the first communication Carmina had had with them. I looked at her and said, "Now let's talk." Carmina looked at the papers on the table. She looked at them for several seconds without touching them, as if by not touching them, she could pretend they didn't exist, as if the simple act of not reaching out for them still gave her some kind of control over the situation. But we both knew that control no longer existed, that she had lost it long before entering that room. She raised her eyes to me, and for the first time in this whole story, I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen in the previous days. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper. It was the face of someone who had carried a weight too great for too long and had finally run out of strength to keep holding it. She said, "Sebastian, it's not what it looks like." I told her to explain then what it was like. There was a long silence. Carmina clasped her hands in her lap, lowered her head, and when she looked at me again, her eyes were wet. She didn't cry. Carmina never cried easily, but she was on the verge. She told me it had all started 2 years ago, that at that time our relationship was in a very difficult place, that I worked too much, that she felt lonely, that she felt I had stopped seeing her as a person and only saw her as part of the structure of the life I had built. That in that moment of vulnerability, Victor had appeared with a proposal. I asked what kind of proposal. She told me that Victor had told her that if she ever decided to separate from me, he would help her, that he had contacts, that he knew how to operate in these processes, that she didn't have to settle for anything less than what she deserved after almost 20 years of marriage. That to protect herself, so as not to be left with nothing if things got difficult, she needed to start documenting, saving information, positioning herself legally before I found out anything. I asked her if she had ever considered just talking to me, telling me she felt lonely, telling me something wasn't working. She lowered her head again. That answer hurt me more than any document, more than any bank transfer, more than any forwarded email, because it meant there had been a time when it was still possible to save something, a time when an honest conversation could have changed the course of everything. And instead, she chose to listen to Victor. I told her I understood our relationship had had problems, that I wasn't blind, but that what she had done wasn't protecting herself. It was betrayal. There was a huge difference between the 2 things, and she knew it. Carmina nodded slowly, without defending herself, without arguing, and in that small gesture, I saw something I didn't expect to see. I saw the woman I had loved, not the one who had been in front of me these last few days, calculating and distant, the other one, the one who had gotten lost somewhere along the way between what we were and what we had become. But the time to save that love had passed. A long time ago. I told her there was something else we needed to talk about, something I knew and that she didn't know I knew. And before she could prepare herself, before she could construct an answer, I said Mario's name. The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. Carmina froze completely. Her breath hitched for a second, and then, very slowly, she closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a moment that seemed eternal, and when she opened them, there was no calculation in her gaze, no strategy, only a woman carrying a 14-year-old secret who had just understood that she could no longer carry it alone. She said, "How did you know?" I told her it didn't matter how I knew, and that what I needed to know now was if she had allowed Victor to use that information as a weapon in the legal process they were planning. She took too long to answer. I said, "Carmina, I need you to answer me that." She told me that Victor had told her that if it was necessary, if I didn't give in to the negotiation, he would reveal the thing about Mario, that he would use it to show that our family had never been what I pretended it was, that it would weaken my legal position in the dispute over the business. I asked her if she had authorized it. She said no. She said that was the only thing she had forbidden Victor, that she hadn't given in on that. That's why the last few months have been so tense between them. That Victor pressured her, and she refused. I looked at her for a long moment, analyzing if what she was saying was true, if there was anything in her face, in her voice, in her posture that indicated she was lying. And I didn't find it. "No, not this time," I said, "but you knew. You knew he had that information, and you let him be near Mario. You let him treat him the way he did for years. You let him ignore him, make him feel different, make him feel like he didn't belong, and you never said anything. Carmina broke down in tears. Not the controlled crying of someone who cries to manipulate. The other kind, the kind that comes from inside and can't be stopped, the kind that comes out when you have no more layers to protect yourself with. She told me between tears that she was sorry, that she had made wrong decisions, that she had been afraid, that Victor had always had that power over her, and she had never known how to break free from him, that everything had gotten out of control, and at some point she no longer knew how to stop. I listened to her. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't console her. I didn't get up to hug her, because the love I had had for that woman was real. I couldn't deny that. But love doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase the forwarded emails. It doesn't erase the transfers. It doesn't erase the years Mario was treated like he didn't belong while she watched without saying anything. It doesn't erase the night they kicked me out of that party and she stood still with her glass in her hand. When Carmina calmed down a bit, I told her with all the clarity in the world what my conditions were. I told her the legal process was going to move forward, that Rodrigo already had everything documented, and that what they had done with the money from the joint account and with the business emails had legal consequences that went beyond a simple divorce. That if she cooperated, if she was honest with the lawyers and the judge, if she didn't let Victor continue to manipulate the process, I would do my best to make the consequences for her as lenient as possible. But if Victor used Mario in any way, if that boy was dragged into this because of a revelation Victor decided to make, if Mario suffered any emotional, social, or any other kind of harm as a result of the decisions of adults who should have protected him from the beginning, I would have no consideration for anyone. Carmina nodded. She told me she would talk to Victor, that she would tell him to stop. I told her it was too late for that, because while we were talking in that room, Rodrigo had already filed the precautionary measure. The business assets were legally protected. Victor's company account had been flagged in the bank report, and the next day, at 9 in the morning, there was a meeting in court to review the case documentation. Carmina looked at me without fully understanding. I said, "I'm not asking for your permission. Carmina, I'm informing you." That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway. We both turned at the same time. Mario was standing at the entrance of the living room. We didn't know how long he had been there. We didn't know how much he had heard. His face was serious, his arms crossed, and he was looking at both of us with that expression of his that always reminded me that that boy understood much more than he let on. Carmina looked at him, and her voice broke when she said his name. Mario didn't answer. He looked at me and said, "Are we going to leave, Dad?" I told him yes. He said, "Good." He went back to his room. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Carmina and I looked at each other. Neither of us was expecting anyone. I got up, went to the door, opened it. It was Victor. He was standing at the entrance of my house with that usual posture of his confident, dominant, like someone who is used to the world accommodating his presence. He looked at me, and without me inviting him, he tried to enter. I put my hand on his chest gently, without aggression, but firmly. I said, "This is my house, Victor, and you're not welcome here." He looked at me with an expression that mixed surprise and contempt. He said he needed to talk to his sister, that what I was doing was crazy, that we still had time to resolve this in a civilized manner. I told him that civilized was exactly what I had been, that for 19 years I had been the most civilized man in the world while I was excluded from conversations. He ignored my son, used his sister as a puppet, and stole money from my account. Victor opened his mouth to reply. I didn't let him. I said, "Tomorrow at 9 your name is going to appear in court linked to a transfer of $73,000 that came out of my account to your company. If you have something to say it to your lawyer." I closed the door, stood behind it for a moment, heard his footsteps move away, heard his car start, and only then did I return to the living room, where Carmina was still sitting in the same place with red eyes and her hands clasped in her lap, looking at the papers on the table as if they were the map of everything that had gone wrong. I didn't say anything else to her that night. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since all this had begun, I felt the real weight of it, all the weight together, the broken marriage, the stolen money, Mario's secret, the lost years justifying the unjustifiable. But under all that weight, there was something else, something small but solid, something that hadn't broken despite everything. The certainty that Mario and I were going to be okay, that what was coming was going to be difficult, but that in the end, on the other side, something was waiting for us that was worth much more than everything I was losing. The truth, the morning of the hearing dawned gray. One of those mornings when the sky seems to know what's happening below and decides to match the mood. I got up early before Mario woke up. I made myself a coffee, sat in the kitchen in silence, and looked out the window for a good while. I thought about the whole journey I'd taken in the last few days, about the door of that hall, about Carmina's face, about the documents, about Georgina, about Elsa, about Rodrigo, about each piece that had fallen into place one by one until it formed an image I never would have wanted to see, but that I needed to see to be able to move forward. I put on a suit I use for the most important business meetings, the dark blue one, the one Mario always said made me look serious, but not boring. I put it on slowly, carefully, like someone preparing for something they know will define what comes next, because what was going to happen that day in that courtroom was going to define the rest of my life. And I wanted to go in there being exactly who I was, without masks, without fear, without anything to hide. Before leaving, I went to Mario's room. I opened the door slowly. He was still asleep. I looked at him for a moment from the entrance. His calm breathing, his relaxed teenage face that can still sleep without the weight of the world on it. I left him a note on the nightstand that said, "I'm going to fix things. I'll call you at noon. There's cereal in the cupboard and money on the kitchen table. I love you, Dad." I left the house. Rodrigo was already at the courthouse when I arrived. He met me at the entrance with a thick folder under his arm and an expression that wasn't exactly optimistic, but it was confident. He told me everything was in order, that the documentation was solid, that the judge we had been assigned was known for being meticulous and fair. He told me to speak only when asked directly and to let him handle the rest. We went in. Carmina was already inside with her lawyer. She didn't look at me when I entered, or she did. But she did it in that way you look and at the same time look away, as if eye contact hurts too much. I sat on the opposite side and waited. Victor wasn't in the room. That seemed strange to me. Rodrigo told me in a low voice that it was possible he had received advice from his own lawyer, recommending he not appear at this first hearing so as not to complicate his situation. What Victor didn't know, what his lawyer probably didn't know yet either, was that Rodrigo had filed a formal fraud complaint the night before linked to the transfers. That turned what started as a divorce proceeding into something much more serious for Victor. Something that could no longer be resolved with a civilized conversation or an agreement between parties. The hearing began. The judge reviewed the documents, asked questions. Carmina's lawyer presented his arguments about the corporate shareholding and the request for asset valuation. Rodrigo responded with the documentation of the forwarded emails, the business email access history, the bank record of the transfers, and Elsa's written statement about the call from the external accountant. The judge listened to everything with a calm that I found difficult to read. He made notes, asked precise questions, gave no signs of which way he was leaning. That made me nervous, even though I tried not to show it. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Carmina's lawyer asked to speak out of turn. The judge granted it, and the lawyer said that his client had a statement she wanted to make voluntarily before the hearing continued. I looked at Carmina. She looked at me and stood up with a calm voice, calmer than I would have expected. Carmina stated before the judge that the bank movements that appeared in the documentation, the $3,000 transfers to her brother's company account, had been made under her authorization, but under direct pressure from Victor, who had told her it was a way to secure funds in case the legal process got complicated. She stated that she had not been fully aware of the legal implications of those movements when she made them, and stated that she was willing to cooperate with any additional investigation the court deemed necessary. Silence in the courtroom. The judge wrote something down, looked up, and asked Carmina if she was making that statement voluntarily and without pressure from any of the parties present. Carmina said yes. Rodrigo touched my arm under the table, a small gesture that meant exactly what I was thinking, that what had just happened was significant, that Carmina had chosen at the last possible moment not to protect Victor. I don't know what happened between them the night before after Victor left my house. I don't know what conversation they had. I don't know if it was guilt or fear of the legal consequences or something deeper that I'll never fully understand. But something changed in Carmina that night, something that led her to stand before a judge and tell the truth, even though that truth complicated her too. The hearing extended for another 2 hours. In the end, the judge issued a provisional ruling that protected the business assets while the investigation into the bank movements was completed. Carmina's corporate shareholding was frozen pending review, and a formal subpoena was issued for Victor to appear to testify within 72 hours. We left the courthouse at noon. Outside, on the steps, Carmina approached me. Her lawyer was a few steps away, giving her privacy. She looked at me and said something I didn't expect. She said, "I know it has no value now, but I'm sorry, Sebastian. I'm truly sorry." I looked at her for a moment and said something I was surprised to hear myself say. I told her I knew that I didn't doubt it was true, but that being sorry wasn't enough to undo what was done. That what she could do, the only thing she could still do for me to have some respect for her, was to be honest in everything that came next. With the lawyers, with the judge, and with Mario. She said she would try. I told her I hoped so. I said goodbye, went down the stairs, called Mario. He answered on the first ring, as always. He asked me how everything had gone. I told him fine, that we would talk calmly when I got home. He said okay, and then he asked if we could order sushi for dinner because he had seen a new restaurant near the house and wanted to try it. I laughed the first time I had truly laughed in days. I told him yes, whatever he wanted. That night, eating sushi at the kitchen table, Mario and I talked. I explained with the most honest and simplest words I could find that his mom and I were going to separate, that complicated things had happened between adults, that none of those things were his fault, that we both loved him, even though we couldn't be together anymore, and that he was going to be fine, that I would make sure of it. Mario listened to everything without interrupting me. When I finished, he picked up a piece of sushi with his chopstick, looked at it for a moment, and then said, "Dad, I already knew. I've been feeling it for a while." I asked him if he was okay. He said, "Yes, as long as I'm with you." Yes, that was all. I didn't need anything else. In the days that followed, things moved quickly. Victor appeared to testify, and his version didn't match the documentation we had at all. The judge ordered a full audit of the company Victor had used to receive the transfers. The criminal fraud case was formally opened. Victor's lawyer tried to negotiate an out-of-court settlement. Rodrigo rejected it. I rejected it because there are things you don't negotiate. There are lines that when someone crosses them, there's no going back. Lilia, Carmina's mother, called me one afternoon. I expected it to be to defend them, to ask me to be reasonable, to use that offended grandmother tone she had always used with me. But she didn't call to tell me she was sorry, that she never wanted things to get to that point, that she always knew Victor went too far. But she never had the courage to tell him that Mario was a good boy and that she hoped I could forgive him one day. I told her that forgiveness was something that took time, that I didn't have it yet, but that I would try. Not for her, not for Carmina, for me, because carrying hatred is too heavy and I had already carried enough. 3 weeks after that hearing, Mario and I moved into a new apartment. It wasn't as big as the house. It didn't have a garden or a guest room or the huge kitchen I bought with so much pride years ago. But it was ours, completely ours, with no old stories on the walls, no uncomfortable silences in the hallways, without the weight of everything that had gone wrong. The first night in the apartment, Mario played music from his room, a song I didn't know, but it sounded good. I peeked at his door. He was putting his things away in the closet, singing under his breath, with that teenage naturalness that makes the hardest things seem completely manageable. He saw me at the door, smiled at me, said, "This place is okay, Dad." I told him yes, it was okay, and it was. That night I understood something that maybe I should have understood much sooner. That a family isn't the last name you share, it's not the house you buy, it's not the party you organize or the money you put on the table. A family is the person who squeezes your hand when you're being kicked out a door. The person who sits with you to eat sushi after the worst day of your life. The person who tells you that everything's going to be okay and you believe them not because it's necessarily true, but because it comes from someone who has never lied to you. I had that. I'd had it for 14 years, and I hadn't always seen it with the clarity it deserved. But I saw it now, and that was enough to start over.